Good morning, everybody, dear colleagues, dear friends. It's a great pleasure to welcome you on this second day of the 9th ESOC conference in Munich. My name is Thorsten Steiner. I'm a neurologist and neurointensivist. I'm a professor at Frankfurt and Heidelberg University. And it's a pleasure to welcome you together with Diana and with Terry, who will be our interviewer today. Hello.
So, good morning and
Good morning.
welcome. So Terry, tell us, what have been your personal highlights from the conference so far? Which findings really struck you the most?
Well, Diana, there's so much content from yesterday that was great, so it's difficult to pick a single highlight. What I was very impressed with was the large clinical trial session, because I think it shows how stroke research has evolved. So I remember many years ago we said we have to have trials with cognitive outcomes, and we saw a trial with cognitive outcomes that was positive. We said we have to have trials that involve older adults, and we saw the Precious trial that had a focus on older adults. And we said that we have to have trials of rehabilitation, and we saw some nice trials of rehabilitation. And for me, it was really that evidence of how stroke research evolves to meet the clinical needs.
Great, that's really an amazing clinical trial session, wasn't it? Fantastic findings, and the opportunity to discuss with people on site the findings is really amazing. So Thorsten, what about you? Do you share the same enthusiasm for ESOC and this first day?
Definitely. We all remember to the first conference, and as Terry just said, it's an amazing development that has taken place within the last 9 years until today. I was impressed to see again a very high number of participants, more than 4,100. I haven't counted the countries though, but I think it's a lot. And I think it's important because this is the way how the exchange works best. And I was very impressed by that.
Exactly, it was really a very great day. So moving to the topic of our discussion, the guidelines. So can you elaborate a bit on the overarching strategy currently for the guidelines at European Stroke Organization?
Yes, so we have guidelines that we want to be important for clinicians working in stroke. In the guideline board, what we often talk about is the 3 in the morning test. We want a guideline that you can use at 3 in the morning when you're dealing with a very complex stroke patient with information that is useful, easy to read, and will help your practice. So if there is one overarching theme to guidelines, it's making content that's useful to the stroke community in Europe.
Great. And what about the implementation in clinical practice and how useful this is for clinicians worldwide?
Well, I guess we would need feedback from the clinical community on how useful they are. We hope they're useful. One of the things that we're very keen on is being led by the clinical community. So the topics for our guidelines don't come from my head or from the head of the executive, they come from the clinical community in Europe. They tell us areas where they feel they need guidance, and then we take that and we form a question, and then that becomes the basis for a guideline.
So, Terry, can you tell us a little bit more about how are these guidelines? How is it done? How do people become involved? What is the technique behind it?
Sure. So we have a process. It's a process that we've been working on and improving on over many years, a process that you began when the guideline group first started. So very important to a guideline is framing the question and making sure the question is one that we can answer with evidence, but also that's useful to the clinical community. And we spend a lot of time trying to get the question right, because if the question is right, the guideline then follows. And we spend time defining the population of interest, the intervention of interest, and very importantly, what are the outcomes that are most important in clinical practice. We then work with our in-house methodologist to search the literature. That's becoming an increasingly challenging task as there's more and more biomedical literature there, but we're becoming more sophisticated in the way we approach that. We then find evidence relevant to the question, and a guideline team, often multidisciplinary, often from across Europe, will work with those papers to extract the relevant data and begin to formulate some answers to the questions. And then we have a framework for how we look at the quality of those answers. And we use the grade framework. So we have a process from end to end to allow us to deliver the highest quality guidelines possible.
Great. Sounds like there is a big group effort to complete a guideline. Thorsten, you already contributed to guidelines, shared guidelines, were involved in the beginning of the guideline board. So can you give us some insights into how this evolved over time?
Sure. So when this all started, actually it came from the Karolinska stroke update meeting. This is where people met and experts met, and then the result was actually an expert guideline, and then we had the idea of switching to the grade system, which took place, I think it was in 2014, and that was together with George and Tyers, and so we started working, and soon after the whole work began, we discovered that it is actually not only that we need to prepare guidelines, but we also need to make people aware of that there are guidelines. So there was the second task, which was how do we publish guidelines? And then we discovered, as you just said, that the thing is not easy. It's a complex thing to do. And so we need more than just a handful of people who is doing guidelines. And so the third task was born, and that was how do we educate people to prepare these guidelines. And this then led into another development, so that we applied for that the committee becomes a board with taking care of all these three different tasks. And next thing was we had to write down how to do it, which is then the standard operating procedure. Now we have the second standard operating procedure in place. Yeah, and this is how it all went.
Great to see how the process evolved over time and took us to where we are now, and we very much look forward into the future to see the future of the guidelines. So Terry, everybody now probably is thinking, how can we get on action and contribute and be involved on stroke guidelines at the European Stroke Organization?
It's a really good question, Diana, and I would encourage anyone that's listening, that's excited about what we're talking about, to get involved. And you can become involved in the guidelines in lots of different ways. So I really would encourage people to submit topics for guidelines. That's how we stay fresh, that's how we stay relevant to clinicians in Europe. If you want to become more involved, you could apply to be one of the writing group for a guideline. We have a chair, that chair selects people, but they're often looking for extra people to come on board. And I wouldn't want people to think that they have to be very senior, that they have to be an expert in their field to be on the guideline. We have space for fellows, people who are earlier in their career, and the feedback we've had is that that's a really great opportunity for them. They network with experts across Europe, they learn about guideline methods, and they get their name on the paper that follows. We're also always looking for peer reviewers, so people that can have a look at our guideline product, give us critical feedback and help us improve the guideline. So at lots of different steps, there's opportunities for people to become involved in the guidelines.
I think that's great for everybody to know, and also, it's a great experience to participate in this process of creating clinical evidence-based recommendations. So, Thorsten, what are you most looking for today at the European Stroke Organization Conference?
So, today we have, as every day, the morning session, and I'm a little bit biased because I certainly need to tell you that there is an ICH session, which is in room 5. And then we have the plenary session, which is really interesting. It's, if I should summarize it somehow, it has a lot to do with blood pressure management in ICH and in ischemic stroke. It is dealing with carotid stenosis and what we do about prevention after interventions, after different interventions. And then we have in the afternoon session, the next major thing, I think, which is the guideline session at 3 o'clock in room
13B.
13B. And then we have late afternoon sessions, and in between there are poster sessions, and I think in the evening there is the guided poster tour.
So Terry, any personal opinions on how the guideline session is today in the afternoon? So the guidelines that will be presented, and
So
the overall topic.
again, like Thorsten, I'm very biased, but I'm quite proud of the guideline session that we're offering today. So it shows really the diversity of the topics that we cover in the clinical guideline group. I wouldn't want people thinking that we're just a guideline group that produces guidance on reperfusion, on acute therapy. We really cover the whole stroke journey, and that's evident in the session today. So we have guidelines on small vessel disease. We have guidelines on primary angiitis of the central nervous system. We have guidelines on motor rehabilitation, tenectoplays, and we have the new STRIVE guidance for neuroimaging in small vessel disease. So you can see there's something for everyone, I hope. And I look forward to seeing people in room 13B for the guideline session.
Yeah, I very much look forward also to attend that session. It will be a great overview of so many important topics in clinical practice for everyone, practicing stroke care across the world. So I think it's now time to sum up. So thank you very much, Thorsten, for steering this conversation with me. Thank you, Terry, for your insights on this process. It has been enlightening to see how this is really a group effort. And so thank you also to the Guideline Board and the Guideline Working Groups for their great work, and it's very useful for all of us to implement our best clinical practice, evidence-based clinical practice. So thank you all. Don't miss the highlights at 4:30 and the interviews. Very much looking forward for the interviews, as well the PI interviews at 6:30. So thank you very much, and see you